was the late summer of 1874, and the wind through Sable Creek had started to turn. Not toward cold, not yet, but toward quiet, as though the land itself was holding its breath for something it couldn't name. Dust curled along the boardwalks, in soft spirals. Horses shifted idly in their traces, and the town, a handful of buildings with more memory than paint, stood waiting for something to change. Or someone. The stagecoach rattled in with the kind of weight that only carried strangers. Its wheels creaked like old bones. Leather curtains swayed, and from inside stepped a woman with posture too steady for a traveler, and eyes too alert for someone who claimed to be tired. Her name was Rosalind Avery. She wore a dark blue dress, simple, serviceable. Her gloves were clean, but not new. In one hand she carried a leather satchel. In the other, nothing. No bouquet, no letter, just stillness. She'd expected a name to be called, a hand raised in recognition. Something, anything, to mark her arrival. But Sable Creek did not meet people. It let them arrive. To her left, a sign swung crookedly above the general store. The saloon's door hung off its hinge. A dog barked once, and went quiet again. No one smiled. No one waved. And that, somehow, was the most honest welcome she'd had in years. She had come from Maine, far too far to be just curious. She left behind a house with polished silver, a man who wanted her for inheritance more than affection, and a life built on someone else's plans. When the letter from Hearts Across Horizons arrived, she did not hesitate. She packed her trunk, wrote no goodbyes, and bought a ticket west, to marry a man who had once filled out a form, and then forgotten he ever had. The sheriff wasn't waiting. He stood near the front wheel of the coach, speaking with the driver. Tall, broad, the kind of stillness that made people think twice before asking questions. His hat sat low. His badge caught the sun. He hadn't come for her. Not really. He was asking about recent trouble, whispers of outlaw riders drifting west. He'd expected a report, not a bride. The driver tilted his head toward her, chuckling under his breath. That one's yours, Sheriff. Says she's your match. The sheriff turned, looked once, and then said, without inflection, didn't know you'd be arriving. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't welcome either. And that, too, was honest. I was told the contract had been finalized, that a room had been prepared. It was, he said. Then time passed. She nodded once. So did I. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The town kept breathing around them, boots on planks, wind in shutters, the creak of something leaning just a little too far in the sun. Then he tipped his hat. Miss Hartley runs the boarding house. She'll take you in. You've got 2 weeks. That'll be enough, she replied. And she walked past him without turning back. He watched her go, didn't follow, didn't explain. Because sometimes, two people collide, not with fireworks, but with silence. And that silence echoes louder than thunder. Rosalind's room at Miss Hartley's was small, barely wide enough for a trunk, a narrow bed, and a hook for her coat. But the window opened to the smell of fresh bread from the bakery behind the house, and sunlight in the morning dusted the floorboards like powdered gold. She didn't need more than that. She folded her dresses into the drawer, lined up a book and a ribbon on the windowsill, and swept the corners twice, not because it was dusty, but because it felt like starting something new. In Sable Creek, no one gave you welcome with words. You earned it with footsteps, the kind that showed up, kept showing up, and didn't ask for applause. By the second day, Rosalind had swept Miss Hartley's stoop. By the third, she was helping the schoolmistress sort chalk. By the fifth, she'd offered a pie crust recipe that made the general store clerk tilt his head, like he was considering the shape of her soul. She didn't try to belong, she simply stayed long enough that the town forgot it ever asked her to prove herself. Across the road, Sheriff Eli Turner watched. He watched the way her hands moved. Slow, sure, like they'd always known work. He watched how she knelt to speak to children at eye level, and nodded to the old man with the cane, even when he didn't nod back. But if you asked him, he wouldn't admit to watching, because watching meant caring, and Eli Turner had locked that door long ago. That night, the sheriff sat in the jailhouse alone. The lamp burned low, and the ledger in front of him had been open to the same page for nearly an hour. From the bottom drawer, he pulled a small green ribbon. Clara. She'd been the kind of woman who always had ink smudges on her fingers. A school teacher who left him little folded notes in his pockets. Riddles, poems, sometimes prayers. They were to be married in the spring, but the cholera came that winter, took her in 2 days. He'd buried her behind the chapel, and hadn't gone back. So, when Rosalind Avery arrived, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, voice quiet, he didn't feel curiosity, he felt warning. Because the heart doesn't know the difference between love and danger when it starts to open again. It just aches. Later that week, she brought him cornbread. No lace, no note, just a napkin-wrapped square, set gently on the corner of his desk. He looked at her, a look that didn't offer anything, didn't ask for anything either. She met it, steady. You look like someone who forgets to eat. I didn't ask for favors, he said. Didn't say it was one. And then she turned and walked out, leaving behind the scent of warm bread, and something heavier he didn't have the words for. He stared at that cornbread for a long time, and then ate every bite. That night, he left the drawer closed, didn't touch the ribbon, but he sat a little longer at the window, and across town, in a room with a crooked hook and clean curtains, Rosalind Avery slept for the first time, without dreaming of trains heading the other direction. By the second week, Sable Creek began to soften around her. Not in any grand way. No one threw open their doors or called out her name in the street. But the silences changed. They became companionable, less watchful. She noticed it in the way the general store clerk asked if she preferred red ribbon or blue. In how Miss Hartley left a fresh towel folded at her door without a word. In the little girl who pressed a dandelion into her hand and ran away giggling before Rosalind could say thank you. It wasn't welcome, but it was beginning. Each morning, she fetched water before the sun reached over the ridge. Each evening, she mended. She hummed when she worked. Never a full tune, just the shape of one, unfinished. And people began to hear it, even when she didn't mean for them to. One afternoon, she passed the livery with a basket of bread. Billy Cross, all of 7 years and missing 2 front teeth, ran beside her breathless. Miss Rosalind, is it true you're marrying the sheriff? She raised an eyebrow without slowing. Who told you that? Ma, and Ma hears everything. Rosalind gave a small smile. Well, your ma's not wrong, but the sheriff may not have been properly informed. Billy looked scandalized. You mean you're a surprise? A courteous one, she said, with a good recipe for cornbread. Billy blinked, then nodded like he'd come to a serious conclusion. You're the sneaky kind of nice. And with that he ran off yelling, she's sneaky nice. Sheriff's got a sneaky nice lady. That evening, Rosalind sat with Miss Hartley folding linens. They worked in silence, until the older woman said, You're good with that boy. He listens, Rosalind replied. Not many men in this town do, especially not the one you came here for. Rosalind looked down at the sheet in her lap, smoothed the corners. I didn't come here to be listened to. I came here not to be ignored. Miss Hartley said nothing more, but she folded the next sheet with gentler hands. And yet, not every gaze she met was warm. She first saw him near the saloon, a man in a dust-colored coat, hat tilted low, chewing a matchstick that never moved. He didn't blink, didn't nod, just watched. 2 days later, she saw him again, this time near the schoolhouse, standing behind the well, too still for a man just passing through. That night her lantern flickered strangely. She checked the oil twice, found nothing wrong. But something in the wind had changed. A boot print appeared in the dirt, near the garden fence. Too deep, too close. A used matchstick. The faint smell of sulfur still lingered. The rosemary plant had been trampled. Not crushed, not careless, just pressed flat, like someone had stepped there and waited. She brought the matchstick to the sheriff. Eli listened without interrupting. His jaw clenched once. Nothing else moved. Name's Holden Varnes, he said, when she'd finished. Used to run with a crew out of Red Rock Ridge. You arrested him? Twice. Last time he lost everything, and now he's circling back to take it out on something I might care about. Her eyes held steady. Then I suppose I've become something worth taking. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than usual. I won't let him take you. That night, as the town folded into its sleep, Eli stood by the jailhouse window, watching the street. his thumb tapping once, then again against the sill. Deputy Cale stepped inside. "She got to you?" he asked, half a smirk under his breath. Eli didn't look at him, just kept watching the dark. "She makes this place quieter," he said. "Like peace?" Cale asked. Eli's voice dropped lower, like a church when no one's praying. And then neither man said another word, because quiet has a sound of its own, and they were both starting to hear it. By the end of her second week in Sable Creek, Rosalind had learned to listen, not just with her ears, but with her skin. And something in the wind had changed. It was a Friday, when the quiet turned. Not loud, not storm or gunfire, just different. A heaviness in the air, like the town itself had braced for something. It didn't want a name. The lamplighters finished early. Children were called home before dusk. Even the saloon emptied faster than usual, its laughter shorter, tighter, like men trying not to breathe too deep. Rosalind stayed late at the schoolhouse, mending a torn shutter. Just her, and the creak of wood, the ticking of the little clock on the shelf. When she stepped out, the sun had already dipped behind the ridge, casting long violet shadows across the dirt road. And the street was empty, too empty. She walked carefully, satchel tight in hand, boots landing soft and sure, past the post office, past the alley behind the general store. Then a sound, a shift, just behind her. She turned, and the world blurred. A hand grabbed her from behind, firm, practiced. Another clamped across her mouth. She thrashed, kicked, elbowed something hard, and heard a curse hissed through teeth. But it wasn't enough. The blade brushed her neck. Not deep, not cutting, just reminding. A voice slithered beside her ear. "Your sheriff's got something coming to him." And then the sky tipped sideways. She was dragged into shadows, and gone. When Miss Hartley noticed Rosalind hadn't returned to her room that night, she lit every lamp in her kitchen and waited, eyes fixed on the road. The next morning, when her bed was still untouched, she sent for the sheriff. Eli arrived with his coat half-buttoned, and boots still dusty from patrol. He said nothing when he saw the satchel, only crouched beside it, and ran his fingers over the scuffed leather. Inside, he found a slip of folded blue cloth, torn from her dress. He stood up slowly. "Get my horse," he said to the deputy. "You want a posse?" "No." A pause. His voice dropped lower. "I want him." He rode east, alone, past the ridge, past the abandoned fences, and wind-burned cottonwoods, toward the canyon, where broken men went to rot, and some, to make others suffer. Eli had been here before. Years ago, as a younger man with a badge too bright, and a heart still full. But this time, he wasn't chasing justice. He was chasing the one thing he couldn't lose again. Eli Turner rode like a man with nowhere left to turn but forward. The canyon path narrowed beneath him, brush on either side, dry and reaching. The stars overhead blinked cold, and his breath ghosted past him, as if trying to escape ahead. He didn't notice. He didn't speak. His thoughts moved slower than his horse, but deeper. He thought of the way Rosalind's voice dropped, when she asked hard questions, of how she never tried to impress, only to help, of the way she handed him cornbread, without asking whether he was hungry, only knowing that he needed something warm. And he thought of Clara, once, briefly, but the image didn't hold. It slid away, like a stone into water, because whatever grief had lived in him for so long, Rosalind had already started to make room beside it. He found the hideout where he knew it would be. An old ranch house curled into a hollow of rock and pine. Burned once, rebuilt badly. The porch sagged, like a tired man's shoulders. A lantern burned inside, dull and lazy. He dismounted, checked his gun, moved like the silence itself. At the side entrance, a man sat dozing with a bottle in his hand. Eli pressed the barrel to his throat. "Breathe too loud, and I'll leave you talking to dirt." The man dropped the bottle. Eli moved past. Inside, the floor creaked just once. The cellar door yawned open. He went down slowly, not out of fear, but because he'd only get one chance. And there, in the half-light of oil and dust, was Rosalind, tied at the wrist, knees scraped, lip bruised, but her eyes were fierce. Holden Varnon stood near the wall, gun at his side. His smile was the kind that didn't reach anything but cruelty. "Well," he said, "if it ain't the heartbreaker in a badge." Eli said nothing. Come to trade bullets or beg. Came to take her back. Eli said. You can try. Eli fired first. The bullet caught Holden clean in the thigh. He crumpled, howling. Another man rose from the shadows. Eli dropped him before he could reach the second step. Then he crossed the floor and cut the ropes himself. Rosalind slumped forward. He caught her before she hit the ground. You came, she whispered. Of course I came. I thought you didn't want me. He paused. His voice was low, frayed. I didn't want to want you. But I do. Every second I'm not near you hurts more than anything I lost before. He brushed her hair from her face, dirt smudged and damp. I love you, Rosalind, and I'm sorry it took fear to make me say it. Then say it again, she whispered. I love you. She closed her eyes, breathing steady now against his chest. And for the first time in years, so did he. They returned to Sable Creek before the sun crested the ridge. No one stood in the street. No cheers, no questions, just the hush of a town that had been listening for the sound of boots returning, and now, at last, heard them. Miss Hartley met them at the door. She said nothing, just opened it, stepped aside, and let Rosalind through. Days passed. Not quickly, not all easy, but slow enough for the hurt to mend, and steady enough that the pain gave way to something else. Not joy, not yet, but rest. Rosalind slept long hours, spoke little, and walked farther each day. The children waved from the chapel fence. The clerk set aside her favorite soap. Even the baker offered her a corner piece of apple tart, without asking. And each night, without fail, Eli sat on the boarding house steps and watched her window flicker out. One morning, she woke to find a folded page slipped beneath her door. It wasn't long. The handwriting was neat. I would marry you, not because I must, but because this time, I know what it means to choose. If you still want to walk with me, I'll be waiting. E.T. They were married beneath the ridge, where the tall grass caught the wind, like whispered blessings, and the creek ran quiet behind them. There was no altar, no garlands, just an old tree that had been standing longer than any of them could remember. Rosalind wore a pale blue dress, one Miss Hartley had hemmed by hand, and a small locket that rested against her collarbone. Eli wore his best coat, polished boots, his badge tucked away in a drawer. This wasn't a ceremony for law, it was for love. The townspeople gathered in a wide circle, standing or sitting on blankets in the grass. Judge Price cleared his throat, then stepped back, and the two of them stepped forward. Eli took her hands, roughened from work. His voice didn't waver, but it came quiet, like something private, said aloud for the first time. I vow to walk beside you when the path is smooth, and carry what I can when it's not, to speak when silence grows sharp, and to listen when words run out. I vow to make a life with you, not perfect, not easy. Rosalind smiled, her hands tightened gently around his. I vow to remind you that you are not alone, to meet you in your storms, and sit with you in stillness. I vow to see the man beneath the badge, and love him, fully. They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, eyes locked, the hush of wind holding its breath. Then he reached for her hand, kissed it once, and leaned in, not rushed, not uncertain, but like a man who knew he'd found something he didn't mean to lose again. The kiss was soft, sure, and in that moment, the sky didn't need fireworks. It had found something brighter. The wedding passed, and the world didn't spin faster. The sun rose the next morning, just as it always had, low and golden, slipping across Sable Creek like honey on stone. Chickens clucked, wood creaked, boots thudded against the boardwalk. But something had changed. The air felt easier. The town, less hollow. They moved into the sheriff's quarters, a small, two-room place behind the jailhouse, with a sloped roof, and one good window. Rosalind swept the floor 3 times the first morning. Not because it was dirty, but because it felt like claiming space. Eli fixed the squeak in the back door. Neither said much about it, but both noticed how the silence settled sweeter now. Each morning, she made coffee and left it beside his reports, always with a twist of cinnamon. Each night, he trimmed the lantern wick, just so the glow would last longer than the stories they read aloud. They never spoke of forever. They just lived like it was already here. One night, as the sky poured stars over the ridge like grain from a torn sack, they sat behind the house with their boots side by side in the grass. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his chin lightly atop her hair. And he said, "Just once, I used to think peace was something that happened to other men." She smiled. "Peace isn't something you find," she said. "It's something you let in." No one wrote books about Sable Creek. No painters came through to capture the bend in the road, the lean of the chapel, the shape of two hands reaching for each other across a quiet table. But stories lived there, and one of them, the one about a sheriff who had closed every door, and a woman who arrived to unlock one more, would settle in the wood and windows, like dust kissed into place by time. She came to marry a stranger, and in time, she married a man who no longer was.